Today we're going to be talking about slope, which is definitely an algebra concept. So this is something that should be familiar to you, very familiar from Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. And remember, in this new unit, what we're doing is we're going to take our geometry ideas and we're going to connect those with our algebra ideas. So today's lesson is actually just going to be a basic review of the algebra idea of slope, and then in the next lesson we will look at how the idea of slope is important in geometry ideas. So slope is defined two ways. One way we can think of slope is by thinking of it as a rise over run. That is a very visual definition of what slope is. When we look at a graph, we can count out the rise between 2 points and then the run. So our rise is our vertical, or if we're thinking about algebra, like a y, and our run is our horizontal, thinking about an algebra graph, that would be our x. So the other way to define slope is symbolically with x's and y's, rise again being like our y-axis. So we're going to do y2 minus y1 over, and then run, that's our horizontal, that's our x-axis in geometry, x2 minus x1. Now some of you sent me a message about the last video that at one point I had done the 2's and the 1's in different ways, and you asked, did I make a mistake? Does it really matter? And that was very observant. The thing is, I guess it both matters and it doesn't. So what matters is that you're consistent. So in this fraction, I put the 2's first for both x and y. It would work just the same as long as I put the 1's first for both x and y. So you just can't mix and match. So as long as you're consistent, it doesn't really matter which one is first and which one is second, because what we do is when we are given a problem, for example, let's say that we're given 2 points, -5, 2, and -4, 1, and we want to find the slope between these 2 points. What we're going to do is we're going to start by naming one of the points, point number 1, and the other point, point number 2. But that's a choice we're making. We could just as easily choose to switch that up and name the other one point 1 and point 2. And that's why the formula doesn't really matter whether it's the 1's or the 2's that come first, as long as you are consistent. So if I do my y2 first, then I also have to do my x2 first. Okay? So that was a really good question that came up a few times after the last video. So in this problem, I'm going to name this first point, point number 1. So that's my x and y number 1. And then I'm going to name my second point, point number 2. So that's going to be my x and y 2. So then my slope, and we use the letter m for slope. I honestly don't know why. I don't. Somewhere along the line, somebody decided we're going to call slope m, and it just stuck, and that's the way it is. And you probably remember from algebra your y equals mx plus b formula, where m was slope. It just is. I don't know why. There's no word I can think of that it would stand for. I don't know. Maybe it is in there in Latin somewhere or something, but I don't know. But m is slope. So now I'm going to apply that slope formula. y2 is 1 minus y1 is 2 over x2 is -4 minus x1 is -5. And this is a caution, be careful of the double negative. Okay, so watch out for that double negative. So on top, 1 minus 2 makes -1. On the bottom, minus a -5. We're really going to be adding here then. So -4 plus 5, I get +1. And then we can clean up that fraction and say, well, it's just equal to -1. So the slope of that line would be -1. Now, in negative slope, in geometry, and algebra, is what we call a falling line. So this is a negative slope, and it's going to make a falling line. Okay? So as we read across a book from left to right, that line is falling. Okay, so next example. let's say that we have the points 2, 6, and -3, -1. Okay, so I'm going to use my formula here, and I'm going to say M is, I need to name my points now, change my color just so it doesn't run into the last problem. That's going to be my point number 1, x1 and y1. And then my point number 2, x2 and y2. Make sure x comma y, remember it's alphabetical, x comma y. All right, so now my y2 is -1 minus y1 is 6 over x2 is -3 minus x1 is 2. So on top I get -7, on bottom I get -5. That doesn't reduce or clean up nicely, but they do both have negatives, so we would at least want to say a negative divided by a negative is really a positive number. So this one created a positive slope in algebra. A positive slope is going to be a rising line. So we'll see that line heading in an upward direction if we have a positive slope. Okay? All right, I almost asked like questions, but that's pointless because even if you do, you can't tell me right now, but email them to me because I do want to answer your questions. But for our next kind of problem, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a graph and think about slope as a visual idea. So in these problems, you're going to be given a line. Let's see. Something like this in the picture. And it actually may or may not have those points clearly defined out. So if it doesn't have those points clearly defined out, then what you're going to want to do is look for any place in the graph where you can find 2 points that are clearly at an intersection. And you gotta be a little bit careful because some of them, they might look kind of close but not perfect. You want to pick points that are definitely perfectly at the intersection of the grid lines there. So then what we could do is we could give those points an x comma y value. This would be -2, 0, because remember x, that's our over, and y is our up. So we could name that point, and then we could name this point x is -1 and y is 3, and we could use that slope formula on them. But I think a faster way of approaching this problem is to think about the other definition of slope, which is rise over run. So what we want to do is think about connecting these points with a rise. I would have to rise up 3, and then I would run over 1. So if slope is rise over run, then I have 3 over 1. Okay? And that gives me 3. And it's a positive 3, which is what we would expect because that line is a rising line. As we move across the page from left to right, that line is heading in the upward direction. So we would expect a positive slope on this one. Okay? Now we'll do one more of these. Okay, so let's say that the problem was like this. And so this one, there's no clearly defined points here, like they're not dotted out for you and already pre-chosen. So then what you would want to do is look at this and go, where do I see points that are clearly defined? And you have several choices. There's a lot of them that are actually clearly defined in this. So you could pick this one, and that would be totally fine. Or you could pick that one and this one, right? That one also clearly defined. It doesn't matter which 2 points you pick as long as they are clearly defined points, okay? So once you've chosen 2 clearly defined points, then we want to count out our rise over run. Now this line isn't really rising. This is our falling line as we read like a book from left to right. So we always read a graph from left to right, just like we read a book in English from left to right. So as we move in that direction, this line actually is not rising. This line is a falling line. So when I think about rise over run on this problem, I'm actually going to think about fall over run. It maybe doesn't have quite as nice of a ring as the rise over run, but it's falling. So our fall with these 2 points is 1, 2, 3, and I'm going to call that a -3 because it's a fall. And then I'm going to run. We always run to the right because that's how we read a book. So we always run to the right. Good lesson in life too. Always run to the right. Do the right thing, right? So rise, in this case, really fall, -3. Run to the right, 3 boxes. We can reduce that down and we get an answer of -1. And then we do expect a negative on this one because it is one of those falling lines. So that's something you can always verify in your answer at the end to make sure that you have the positive and the negative correct. Okay, so today's lesson, a review of the algebra idea of slope. And then in our next lesson, we're going to talk about why this idea of slope is important to geometry concepts. So let me know what questions you have, and I'm happy to help you out. Talk to you later.